All right, I'm going to just dive right in. We'll get started. My name is Dan Rundy. I think you guys are here for the public speaking talk, so we'll get going. Things we're going to cover today are a little bit of background, sort of where public speaking came from. We're going to look at some of the relevant literature. There's some various people have different perspectives on sort of where public speaking, sort of what are the vital and important roles. There's traditionalists and decentralists. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and then hopefully some examples that you can use in your own speaking. So other things we're going to go into, putting stuff into context, ways that you can improve your vocalization, and strategies for measuring the impact of your talks, and then also trying to determine sort of your audience, how worthwhile their feedback and input are going to be on your talk. That varies depending on the crowd that you're lecturing to, so that's an important thing to consider. So there's a lot of stuff. This goes way back all the way to sort of like pre-Grecian, and I think it's sort of important to understand that to get a sense of sort of where we are today. And then there are talks that we're all familiar with the Grecian, the Greek tragedies, and so those sort of proto-plays all the way up through sort of more modern things we'd be familiar with in public speaking, the barrister tradition in the United Kingdom, and that was sort of adapted into American debates. And I just think it's to have some context when you're thinking about these things is something that you need to do if you want to understand what's going on. So you can see from this slide there's a bunch of different methodologies and things you need to think about. Again, putting stuff into historical context before you move on. And it's really important to get that sort of in your mind going forward, or you're going to have a really difficult time putting your talk into sort of an operationalized context. So this is a quote you guys are probably familiar with, Heberden, about decentralized theory. I won't read it to you, but it's just, I think if you just want to take a minute and try to digest it, it's important. So I'm just going to be quiet for a second. Right. So that was sort of a, hopefully I'm glad, I don't think anybody actually left, which I appreciate. So that was hopefully an example of things not to do. This is start of my actual talk. We've all been there for difficult public speakers. I think even people who are experienced have a lot of trepidation about that. And so this is going to be just a very sort of introductory talk on simple things you can do to try to improve how your presentations come across, how your speaking goes. Again, I appreciate your patience, and hopefully some of the things that I just did serve as examples, clear examples of what not to do. We're going to talk about that a little bit because I'm certainly guilty of doing some of those things not on purpose, and I'm sure you've all had that experience as well. So this is for anybody of my generation. This has a lot of sort of import to it. The sense that you go on this journey and it can be kind of tough, and public speaking, I think, feels like that for a lot of us. So what we're going to cover today are just avoiding easy mistakes, kind of talking about those, talking about how to own your topic, whatever it is that you're speaking about, giving the audience the sense that you've put some time in and prepared and are ready to discuss both the content that you put on the slide and any questions or issues that they have, and then trying to keep things focused. So we're going to talk about the temptation to make your talk too broad, too detailed, and why that can sometimes have some negative impact. So the first thing you need to do is appreciate your audience. It's a sign of respect. The way that I started out that talk, not making eye contact, just kind of diving in, not thanking everybody for showing up relatively early on the first day of a conference, that's not a good way to start. No matter where you are, whether you're lecturing to a group of, M1 medical students or senior residents or a grand rounds, you want to let the audience know that you appreciate their time right up front. It also sort of sets the stage for what you're going to talk about. That sort of idea of signposting in public speaking is important. Even if you don't do it in a particular order, obviously I didn't start out by telling you I was going to try to give 5 or 6 slides of a terrible talk. At some point, sort of letting the people that you're working with know where you're going is important. And so it's really this kind of thing. It's not so much giving everybody in the audience a car, but it's just letting them know that their presence and their energy is something that you're concerned about and that you're hoping that they're going to get something out of your talk. It may seem a little counterintuitive to talk about, in a talk about public speaking, to talk about design choices, but that's actually really important. Poorly executed sort of visual presentations can really detract a lot from what you're saying, and it can keep the audience from processing what you're talking about. So it's one of those things where when you put together, and we've all seen this, when you put together something where people aren't able to focus on what you're talking about because they're working so hard to read what's on the page, or there's the background doesn't work, or there's something that's overly distracting, it really can make things a little bit difficult. So the most obvious one, and this is something I think that we struggle with because we really want to share the information, is putting too much text on a page. Basically what you see when you do that is that the audience, no matter how engaging you are, no matter how dynamic you are, what happens is you end up losing people. They end up reading ahead because that's just naturally what we do. As type A people, we want to sort of pass the test and get ahead on stuff. And while you're talking, people are, focusing on what's up on the page, and it can really sort of serve to detract from the message you're trying to send. And this thing about the clown, the thing about reading it is true. The thing about crying at McDonald's, not so much. But just as an example, you're a very respectful audience. If this was my residence, somebody at some point would have laughed because they would have actually not been paying attention and definitely read ahead. So the other one is sort of in this same vein, is tell, don't show. So for a talk like this where you're talking about talking, you don't have to have a bunch of subtext. But when you're lecturing on an academic topic, there are things that you might not remember off the top of your head. There are details, there are stats, there are dates, there are names of authors and papers. It's okay to put those things in your presenter notes and keep your slides cleaner. It does 2 things. It keeps the audience, as we talked about, from just reading everything on your slide or tuning out. It also has the side benefit of making you look a little bit smarter than you are. And that's, at least for somebody like me, that's a huge sort of side benefit of having everything down in the presenter notes. It's not one of those, he's got everything memorized, but it shows that you've put some effort and some time in. So it's sort of the opposite. It's like being a reverse magician. You keep everything back in an area that the audience can't see, but you can deliver that content to them, and sometimes it ends up feeling a little bit like magic. The other thing is you don't want to make assumptions about your target audience. Now, there's some baseline things about intelligence and background, but when you make assumptions, you can get yourself into trouble, and that's because ideally, if you're not a content expert on the thing that you're talking about, it's at least something that you put some significant time and effort into learning about, and when you do that, you can kind of get into sort of a hall of mirrors with yourself where you're like, oh, everybody knows this, everybody is familiar with this background, and you start talking about things that are not common knowledge to your base. And so trying to make sure that you adequately gauge the level of knowledge of your audience, and if you have something that seems basic to you but is not, that you spend a little bit of time conveying that background information as appropriate. You don't obviously want to go into too much detail, and I was trying to illustrate that. We often have a sense we do the background, we do the epidemiology, we do everything else on a talk, and sometimes that's important, but sometimes you can lose your audience before you start. And it's just one of those things. I don't know if anybody looks at The Onion, but this is something that to me it's this sense of you can get really, really into a topic, and although it's something that you find endlessly fascinating, might not be for everybody that you're talking to, and so you have to kind of know that and tailor your approach to that level. So those are some of the basic pitfalls. I'm going to transition now to this idea of really owning your talk and trying to transition from feeling like the guy on the left there to the guy on the right. Public speaking is something that causes a lot of anxiety, and it's not something. These are very loaded presentations. When I got asked to give this talk, the first thing you go through is, man, this is a tough standard to follow because everybody in the audience is thinking this is the guy they asked to be the expert on public speaking. It's sort of a loaded proposition off the bat, and unless you're like an Amal Mattu, it can be hard to live up to expectations. And so what you want to do is just try to prepare and try to put the time into knowing what you're talking about. So again, it's a sign of respect to your audience that you've done the work, you've looked at the background, you've given some thought to your presentation. And so it's not about being arrogant, but it's about having some confidence in what you're talking about. So, academically, you're trying to do the equivalent of this. When there is relevant literature, you're trying to go through not just maybe the newest article, but trying to get a sense of where that topic of knowledge, sort of how it's evolved. You don't have to always deliver all of that to your audience, but putting that time in and being able to put things in context for yourself can allow you to make decisions about what you're going to talk to people about and tailor your talk appropriately. And so I think everybody knows the iconic scene that follows this one. I'm actually not sure which Rocky movie this is from, but I thought instead it's just a more moving moment than him getting on the top of the steps in Philadelphia. And also you want to keep people guessing a little bit. So the other thing involved in owning your topic, and you see this with really, really good speakers, really people that are knowledgeable, is inviting questions both during the talk and after, and really acknowledging different viewpoints. So owning your area of knowledge does not mean that you are the final word and that you sort of brook no dissent. You need to be open to criticism. The people that I've seen that I've always been the most impressed with are people who can take a question on the fly, who can have somebody who vehemently disagrees with them get involved and have a sort of a respectful discussion instead of just shutting it down. To me, that's always been a mark of somebody who really is knowledgeable and is confident both as a presenter and as somebody who's an expert in the area that they're talking on. And so rather than getting your hackles up and being defensive, really trying to invite engagement with the audience and invite the criticism or dissent is actually not a bad idea. The other thing is that kind of competition can really serve to sort of elevate everybody's game. It's not a bad idea to go see other speakers in an area that you're interested in and either blatantly steal from them or use that to sort of drive you to give a better talk, to take your presentation to the next level, to put in a little bit more time. This is probably one of the most romantic movies of all time. Top Gun, for those of you who haven't seen it, the real romance is not between Tom Cruise and the leading actress. It's between Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer. It's a chemistry that I think should have won an Oscar. It's probably unparalleled in the history of cinema. And it's the intensity right there in Val Kilmer's eyes. It's also sad for anybody who's seen what the ravages of time have done to Val Kilmer versus Tom Cruise. The movie would be a little bit different if we made it today. So we've talked about avoiding pitfalls. We've talked about really trying to own your content. The other thing is trying to keep it focused. So this is true of everybody in this room in some area. You know a lot about a lot of things, and you probably know a heck of a lot about some things. So you know a lot of things. Presumably, if you're at Cord, you're an educator, and that's all great. You would think that that's a winning combination, but it can actually be a little bit dangerous in practice. And I'll try to illustrate a reason. So as anybody that works with me knows, I'm a huge nerd. I'm a giant fan of Lord of the Rings. I could talk endlessly about multiple topics. One that I find fascinating is people trying to actually gauge the distance. They don't give miles in these books, but fans have talked about average foot speed of hobbits and time and come up with these arcs of transfer to figure out exactly how far it would be from Hobbiton in the Shire to Mount Doom in Mordor. And it's the kind of thing that I could talk about forever. I know a lot about, and I think it's really exciting. And I could even say, oh, that's too complex. Let me simplify it. We'll just talk about all the different characters and their path from Rivendell, where the Fellowship set out, to where they end up in Mordor. And again, this is something I'm engaged on, and a lot of this seems very obvious. But when you look out at the audience, what you end up with is sort of something like this happening in the brains of your residents, your med students, your colleagues, and that's not what you want. So the idea is, even if you know a lot about something, is trying to keep it focused, pick a couple of things that you think the audience might actually be able to take away from your talk, and go with that. So that's not an easy thing to do. Editing is hard. So there are so many things you can talk about. There are so many interesting areas within a topic. Trying to pare that down into something that's going to be digestible for your audience takes a lot of work. It's actually a lot harder to put together 25 or 30 good slides on something than it is to do sort of one of those 90 to 120 slide just bombs where you hit them with everything. And that's awesome if it's a board review course that people are going to go back and look at later. If it's a lecture designed to really try to communicate something that people can digest in that talk and take home with them, it's something that really takes work on your part. So it's part of our job, though, as teachers. And again, it shows some respect for the people that you're talking about. I keep trying to come back to that, this idea of, as a speaker, as an educator, our role is to try to convey knowledge, to try to keep our learners engaged, and that's not always an easy thing to do. Part of it is sort of knowing when to say when. So, keeping it focused, it's really difficult, and sometimes you do things where you give a trial run and you say, oh, that was not good, I'm going to do better the next time, and that's okay. When you make a decision like that, sometimes you have to try a talk a couple of times to decide what should go in and what should go out. So bringing everything back together, just again to try to summarize some of the main points. So the first thing is avoiding the easy mistakes. It's, we try, we practice, but in execution, that can be hard. So trying to make sure that you keep your slides in a manner that is like easily read by the audience, trying to edit the text on your slides, trying to make sure that you don't make assumptions about your audience's knowledge base and background is something that you got to do. You don't always succeed. So, sometimes you think you put together something that's beautiful, and when you actually end up trial running through it, it doesn't work the way that you want it to. That's okay. Knowing that you need to go back to the drawing board every once in a while it's not a fail quite in the way that this Pikachu cake is a fail. It's more just that this part of the process of both public speaking and educating is knowing you're not always going to nail it the first time, and trying to put a little, just acknowledge what went wrong, what you can do better. So again, it seems really simple. It's not, and you just need to acknowledge that up front, and you're going to be a lot happier. Sort of this idea that you've got to, to make it look easy is actually hard, and realizing that is going to serve you really well going forward. And with that, this is a little ironic that I'm doing this on a computer like this, because now one thing I'd like to talk to you about, for anybody who's ever given a talk anywhere, is talking about sort of dongles. And this is in the broader sense of having a backup and being prepared. You'll find that when you give a talk in a strange environment, something invariably will go wrong. Your presentation's not going to load. It's not set up okay. The best way to get around that is to, if you can, bring your own computer with its own output, because then your slides look exactly the way that they looked when you practice them, and all the time and effort you put into making things look nice actually comes through. Having electronic backups, both in email, Dropbox, accessible through multiple media, is usually the way to go, and having a flash drive ready. It's really, really important. Even today, coming through trying to get this talk to load, I got here a half hour early to put it up, and there were problems with it. They had to bring the tech person in to fix that, and that's something that you'll see happens over and over again if you end up giving talks other places. And so having your slides available in a variety of formats and having backups on you in multiple arenas is going to serve you really well. You do look a little bit like this guy, but that's okay. It's much better to be this individual going through the airport than to be the person who forgets their deodorant when they unpack at Cord. I'm not saying that that was me, but it might have been me, and you don't want to be that guy. So the idea is with enough preparation, with enough practice, you can get to a point where either you're ready to go or you think you're ready to go, and hopefully that's how things sort of end up for you, as opposed to, and this might be me on the beach later, being this guy that's real excited, you're happy to be here, you're happy to give this talk, and you just don't quite get there, and that can be unfortunate, and that's okay. Hopefully this guy will still have a good time. I know I'm going to enjoy the rest of Cord, and with that, I just want to say thank you and open it up to anybody that has any questions. Okay. So the question was watching TED Talks to develop speaking skills. I think that's a really, really good idea. At this point, I would assume everybody is familiar with TED Talks. If you're not, they get people who are innovators, leaders, of all kinds of backgrounds and stripes, and they'll talk on an area. It's very not PowerPointy, and that's the point. The talks are usually very high energy, very focused. The people that do them are usually excellent, and it's a very high bar to set for yourself, but it can give you some really good ideas about how to present. So I think it's an excellent way to approach things. Does anybody else have any questions? So aside from the things that I did sort of purposely erroneously in the initial talk, obviously not pretending that the talk that I gave afterwards was perfect. So if anybody noted anything that could be improved that they wanted to share, now would be a good time. You could mention it publicly and we could discuss it, or if you want to talk to me about it afterwards, I'm happy to engage with you. Yeah, I think it's a challenge. I think trying to hit the happy medium is good. So it's in a talk like this where the content's a little different, it's more challenging. I'm just trying to keep it fun and light. I think when you're delivering a talk on, hemolytic uremic syndrome, it's one of those ones where you can pace it out and you're like, okay, I got, there are just some academic vegetables you have to get across. It can't all just be like, slideshows and people spinning around. And the idea is, hit them with 4 or 5 good slides of content, and then use a piece of humor to sort of like tie something up, emphasize a point, emphasize a transition. But it is a challenge, and you also have to know your audience. You have to know when you're speaking to them. First thing in the morning, people are going to be a little bit more focused than if you're getting them right before lunch, and so what you have to do to keep attention does vary a little bit by time. There was another question, I think, in front. Yeah, and I think it's a challenge. It's also, and this is a hard one for me to talk about because it's a big part of my speaking style. Obviously, not all good speakers, in fact, a lot of good speakers aren't funny. And I think that's what I've taken from that is that idea of a lot of good speakers, though, they own their content. Like they don't do a lot of jokes. They don't do a lot of, there's not a lot of sidebars, but they just know it's so cold and you watch them talk. And so, I think of, Marion Gachet Hill, from Harvard, UCLA, right? Nationally renowned expert on multiple things. And she actually has a story about her second time speaking at ASAP, and she'd seen somebody who used a lot of comedy and she tried to, integrate that into her talk. And that's not who she is. And she said it was terrible. It was just this aching silence in the room. And she was like, that's not who I am. And, went back to sort of her strengths. And, obviously he's had an incredibly successful career educating people all around the country. So you have to know, your own style and your own strength. It's not everybody tells jokes and has it go well. But if you make it very clear that you're in charge of the content you're presenting, I think that goes a really long way with the people that you're talking to. So, and again, with the very weird caveat of this is a super loaded subject to present on, because I'm not sure why they asked me to do this one. It's that kind of thing. You're like, oh, okay, great. And then, they're like, he's not a mama too. And you're like, no, I'm not. But, he happens to be somebody who is funny, but even if he wasn't, his content knowledge comes across when he speaks. When he gives a talk to the, AHA, there's not as many jokes, and it still comes across well. So, any other comments or questions? What was your name, by the way? Ed. Also, can we get a round of applause for Ed, because I think his feedback was super valuable.
Okay, so we have a little bit of this switch. If you're going on, we're paired up with the next talk, which is a hall and a half. You got to go down and outside to the Ocean Ballroom, and then we're back here. Unfortunately, a little break. Otherwise, if you're looking at other tracks, follow the map accordingly.